dark-haired protagonists of a song of ice and fire and blood. So,
well, thank you for having us here again, Saffia, and thank you for the excellent suggestion for this talk when you mentioned what the focus of the LitFest was going to be this year. It seemed like a good fit to bring up these characters because they are certainly characters in their own right. Obviously, there are no animals that quite think or talk like humans in A Song of Ice and Fire and the other tales set in Westeros, but certainly who could imagine these stories without the dragons and without the direwolves? And through their bond with various key characters and through their own personalities, they have become very memorable and very emotionally engaging characters that I think many fans are as worried for as they are for the human characters. And I decided to bring a little, well, wolf anyway with me, and he's certainly big enough to qualify as a dire wolf. So I'm very happy that Teagle released their dogs for the fair this year, so I could have the perfect companion for this chat. Coming as a dragon avatar seemed like it was gonna break the chairs, so I passed on that one.
This is clearly Ghost, though, from the colour.
Yes, red eyes and a nice white fur. Not quite albino. I think somebody did release an albino skin, but didn't have time to pick that one up. But I got the red eyes anyway, so he's mostly accurate anyway.
Right.
So I thought we'd start with looking at the dragons. Even I'll have to apologize to Ghost here later. And I think we'll start with the most important part about the dragons. They have 2 back legs and 2 front limbs, which are their wings. They are not, as George says, insects with 6 legs. I know that in traditional fantasy and a lot of sort of dragon lore, you separate out wyverns as the ones with a total of 4 limbs, and dragons essentially end up with 6 limbs because they have 4 limbs plus 2 wings. But that was not what he wanted, because he said we don't really have any 6-legged animals in that sense, that they have wings on top of that are just sort of attached. So very happy that we also have a new dragon avatar that looks exactly like that in Second Life, so that's going to be fun to play with. But yes, that's what our dragons look like in Westeros, and they are so they're not wyverns, despite the lack of those 2 extra legs. And I think in a previous talk we've admitted that we were to blame for some of those 6-legged dragons or 4-legged 2-winged dragons appearing in the art, since we accidentally had that on the Targaryen heraldry that we did early on, and it sort of snuck into some of the official stuff, and then it snuck back into House of the Dragon. Now that they basically, I think they reused some of the assets and then ended up with the 4-legged dragons. So we have an interesting mix in the various sources now, especially when it comes to the shows. There's a mix of Targaryen dragons. Some of them have 4 legs, some of them have 2 legs. But that's not quite what we're going to be talking about today, I thought. We'd focus on the fact that what we know about the dragons. And the origins are very much clouded in mystery. And there are various stories about where they come from. If you ask a Dothraki, there was a second moon that in reality was a giant egg, and when it shattered, thousands of dragons poured out. And others claim that dragon riding was in fact taught to the Valyrians by people from lands beyond the Shadow. But one possibility, Septim Barth and others bring this up, and certainly I think the Valyrians would hold to that idea, is that dragons were creatures that they created. The blood mages of Illyria took wyverns and fireworms and merged them together, and perhaps they inserted a bit of their own blood into the dragons as well, and perhaps some of the dragons' blood into themselves. Certainly, it is claimed that the Targaryens have the blood of the dragon, and they and the other Valyrians have a very special connection to dragons, and this is a magical connection that is tied to their blood, and that is why the nobility of Valyria, especially the dragon lords, began to practice incest. They wanted to retain, perhaps even strengthen, this blood tie that gave them the ability to control dragons, and they certainly didn't want it spreading out into other populations, since the dragons was their way of controlling their empire. And we see that the bond with the rider is a kind of magical connection, and they certainly won't just accept any other rider. Daenerys mentions to Quentyn Martell that she will need other riders for Rhaegal and Viserion, because she rides Drogon, and she says that even Aegon the Conqueror, he never rode his sister's dragons, and they never rode Balerion. So you have, as a rider, you have one dragon. Perhaps you can claim another dragon if that dragon dies, but it's uncertain. All the dragons, on the other hand, will probably go through several riders, because obviously dragons live much, much longer than humans. And if they have been ridden before, they are usually more amenable to being ridden again. On the other hand, if they are, adult, or at least, young adults, and they have not been ridden before, they can be fairly picky about accepting someone. In the dance, the Blacks are trying to get more dragon riders on their side, and there are some riderless dragons on Dragonstone, and there are some wild dragons who've never been ridden on Dragonstone. And they have a bunch of people signing up to basically attempt to claim these dragons. And quite a few of them end up being lunch instead, because the dragons are not just going to accept anybody. Valyrian blood seems to be one component. They talk about, people having drops of Valyrian blood on Dragonstone because the Targaryens tended to sleep around a bit. But it's not a guarantee. They might still decide that I don't want you in particular riding me. And then, they might show their displeasure in a very obvious way.
It makes me think of Naomi Novik's dragons, where there's an entire, she has different breeds of dragon, and there's an entire breed that for centuries couldn't be tamed until Elizabeth I, the Queen of England, had the bright idea of putting up one of her female servants, to ride the dragon, and the dragon was like, yeah, this is what I've always wanted. I'm ridden by women.
That's right. She's got some interesting ideas for how the various breeds are, interacting in different ways with the dragons. They always got very different personalities as well between the breeds, and from the extremely, refined and elegant celestials, and then the very feisty Turkish ones, I believe it is, that Iskierka is from, and the fire breathers tend to have a temper to match. I think most Targaryen dragons seem to have quite a temper. They're not of the tea drinking polite type of.
Yeah.
Yep. Our own little direwolf here is being demanding, so I had hoped for Rand to hop in here, but I will just keep blabbing on then, because he has to make sure that little Lancelot doesn't do anything stupid. Like peeing on his computer like he did yesterday.
Oh no!
Yes, he lifted his leg on his computer.
Oh no!
Fortunately, everything survived.
Good.
So, we were talking about this bond that the dragons have with their riders, and it seems that in some instances... Oh yeah, it's a little spoilery, so I'm gonna keep it that... Van jumped in and said, no, spoiler! Yes, it is a spoiler, so I will... I'll keep them nameless, but basically there is a point where a dragon that isn't anywhere near its rider seems to sense that the rider has died. So the bond seems to be a mind-to-mind bond, much like you have with the direwolves and basically the skin-changing ability that we see the Starks displaying. Whether there is anything to this magic that created the dragons and created the bond with the Valyrians that in fact uses the same sort of magic as skin-changing does. It's an interesting thought, because you have obviously some Targaryens who dream these dragon dreams of prophecy. And the others that we know have prophetic dreams, well, we have the Green Seers, and we have Bran and his dreams. And the wolf dream also seems to sometimes hint at things. So, is there some connection? Should we be thinking that there were perhaps children of the forest alikes in Valyria, on that continent as well? Certainly there are suggestions of that were somehow involved in this process, or that their bloodlines were involved in this process. What seems clear is that the dragon mind is a more alien mind than perhaps the direwolves. When, as we shall see later on, when we have the Starks communicating with their direwolves and being in their heads, basically, their way of thinking is not that different. I mean, it's clearly an animal, but it's not that strange. And George has commented when he's been asked about whether the dragons are intelligent, as he said that, well, if there are, it is an alien intelligence. So they're not like Smaug from Lord of the Rings, or indeed Temeraire from Naomi Novik's books, where it is very much the same sort of intelligence as we see in humans. He sees them as having clearly a very alien mind. That said, they seem to be tied into prophecy, and they, I guess particularly Drogon, because there's where we see most of the actions of a dragon. The dragons that we see in Fire and Blood, for example, we don't get the same insight into their actions as we do with Drogon and Daenerys. But he sometimes acts against her wishes, and he acts on his own at moments, decisive moments. For example, the first instance would be in the House of the Undying, where they are attempting to steal her life force, essentially, and Drogon, who has been with her, when she's helpless, he manages to cut through the illusions around her and attacks the Undying. So he has a magic of his own when he interacts with her there, and when he starts attacking the Undying, he breaks the spell on her, and without any commands. Obviously he's defending her, but the idea that he can somehow, he seems impervious to this magic. He doesn't seem taken in by the illusion in any way, and is able to act to break the spell on her. And then when they're on the Dothraki Sea, in A Dance with Dragons, she has been calling for him, and she has been trying to get him to go where she wants him to go. And then suddenly he shows up. I'll figure I'd read a little package here, a little passage, not a little package, to give a sense of what's happening here. She called until her voice was hoarse, and Drogon came, snorting plumes of smoke. The grass bowed down before him. Dany leapt onto his back. She stank of blood and sweat and fear, but none of that mattered. To go forward, I must go back, she said. Her bare legs tightened around the dragon's neck. She kicked him, and Drogon threw himself into the sky. Her whip was gone, so she used her hands and feet and turned him north by east, the way the scout had gone. Drogon went willingly enough. Perhaps he smelled the rider's fear. So as soon as she changes her mind about where she needs to go, he answers her call, and he hasn't been, basically he has read her mind, sensed her changing her decision, and is here acting in the interest of Quaithy's prophecy. To go forward, I must go back, and only when she decides to go back does Drogon come and decide, yep, I will take you where you need to go. So is he somehow tied into the prophecy? Is he an agent of prophecy? Is that how dragons can act, basically, because they are such magical creatures? They are somehow influenced by prophecy and aware of what needs to happen. So she should probably be listening to Drogon and his decisions going forward. Unless he decides to eat the wrong people, of course. You never know about these. He might just be hungry and then takes a snack of the wrong person, and then she might want to tell him not to. And we have some examples of other dragons acting of their own volition and acting in strange ways, perhaps. There's an episode from Fire and Blood where a young Targaryen princess disappears, and it seems that she has decided to claim Valyrian, who was an unclaimed dragon at this time, and flown away on him. And when they return, she's dying from some strange magical disease. She's boiling from the inside, and things come out of her body. And Valyrian has massive wounds on him, and he's the largest Targaryen dragon. He's enormous, and what could possibly have caused these wounds on him? And of course, he was born in Valyria before the Doom. He came with the Targaryens to Dragonstone, and it seems that somehow he went home to Valyria, the haunted, demon-infested ruins of Valyria after the Doom, and brought poor Aerea, who was on his back, with him. Why did he go there? He had seemingly accepted her as a rider. If he didn't want her riding him, why did he accept her? Or did he accept her as a rider so she would take him out of the dragon pit, and he knew that he could, well, she's not going to tell me what to do, so I can head home because I want to go back home? Or was it that Aerea tried to tell Valyrian that she, after they had flown for a while, she wanted to explore, I want to go home, and, well, he interpreted it as Valyria. Either way, it came to a very sad end for her, and gave us some more insight into the fact that something very, very bad went down in Valyria, that it wasn't just, well, all those volcanoes going off, but there seems to be some kind of magical contamination there that has caused all sorts of strange creatures and so on. The case of Silverwing and the wall. When Alisani went to and she was visiting, and she wanted to take her dragon to fly over the wall, to go north beyond the wall. But the dragon wouldn't do it. So we have a passage here where she wrote to Jaehaerys about it. Thrice I flew Silverwing high above Castle Black, and thrice I tried to take her north beyond the wall. But every time she veered back south again and refused to go. Never before has she refused to take me where I wished to go. I laughed about it when I came down again, so the Black Brothers would not realize anything was amiss. But it troubled me then, and troubles me still. We know that there's magic in the wall, magic that keeps magical creatures from passing through it at will. The dragons, it seems, are enough magical and perhaps enough a created creature that it cannot pass the magic of the wall. Presumably, if a dragon rider went north of the wall, they would lose touch with their dragon, just as we see, and I'll bring that up later in the section on the direwolves. That's what happens when a direwolf and the person bonded to it are on separate sides of the wall. So even though Drogon is able to counteract some kinds of magic, the magic that is in the wall is impervious to dragons and will stop them from going from one side to the other. So you'd have to fly around it somehow if you wanted to go far north on your dragon. And do you have any other thoughts that you want to bring up when it comes to dragons, Van?
Not really. I guess I think that covers very well the dragons. I mean, they're fascinating in that George depicts them as both very, very primal. They're tuned to violence. They're creatures of fire and violence. But at the same time, there's these hints that there's something more to it. I keep thinking about his remark about their alien intelligence, that you don't understand them as humans do. Of course, there's one dragon, but I suppose House of a Dragon will show later, who isn't quite as violent as the others. That'll be kind of interesting to see how people react to that one.
Yes, I think we'll certainly see quite a lot of dragons, and if people have watched House of the Dragon, I imagine that they are all very impressed with how they have managed to put so many dragons on screen and give them different personalities and different looks as well. But they definitely make them characters in a very cool way. The direwolves, of course, if we're thinking about shows, unfortunately they didn't get as much time on Game of Thrones as one perhaps would have liked. The problem there being that dragons are entirely CGI creatures, where it's harder to do a complete CGI wolf, because it's a creature that we sort of know what it's supposed to look like. Now, the direwolves, of course, are not our regular wolves, and I wanted to open this section with a quote from Leaf, the Child of the Forest, on sort of the magical creatures or the special creatures of the North and of Westeros before the humans. The gods gave us long lives, but not great numbers, lest we overrun the world as deer will overrun a wood when there are no wolves to hunt them. That was in the dawn of days, when our sun was rising. Now it sinks, and this is our long dwindling. The giants are almost gone as well, they who were our bane and our brother. The great lions of the western hills have been slain. The unicorns are all but gone, the mammoths down to a few hundred. The direwolves will outlast us all, but their time will come as well. In the world that men have made, there is no room for them, or us. We know that direwolves used to roam in large packs in the north, even the north that is south of the wall. But at the start of A Game of Thrones, none have been seen south of the wall for 200 years. So a lot of them have been hunted and driven further north, and the big game, of course, has been hunted. So they've had to go further north to find things to hunt. And certainly a direwolf needs a lot to eat. They can grow larger than a small pony and are around twice the size of large hounds, with longer legs and larger heads than regular wolves. And they also have longer and more pronounced muscles, looking very lean and fierce. So not these heavy, stocky creatures, but lean, mean killing machines, basically. Of course, the opening, the very important opening of A Game of Thrones is when the Stark children find the 6 direwolves and their dead mother. And, it's 6 of them, it's 6 Stark children. Well, there's 5 direwolves and 5 trueborn, and then there's the albino, of course, for the bastard, for Jon. And immediately there is a connection there. The Starks, of course, have the direwolves on their banner. They have the direwolves sitting with the old Stark kings in the crypts. So it's not strange that there is a family connection there, even though no one ever claims that there's direwolf blood in the Stark lines, I think. But it's clear from how they bond that there's definitely a magical connection here beyond, having a dog that is loyal and protecting you. We see on several occasions that the direwolves show mistrust of characters who turn out to be antagonists, and that they appear to trust characters who can be relied on, suggesting that, is it just sniffing out who's good and who's bad? It seems like there's a kind of magical ability here, being able to sense who is going to spell trouble for them and their owner in the future. Certainly, if Robb had listened to Grey Wind and the people that he showed that he was mistrusting of, the story would have been very different. What's interesting if you look at the characters that they react to, is that several of the direwolves react angrily to Tyrion in the first book. And Ghost, much to Jon's surprise, likes Melisandre. So here we have 2 characters that generally most people would see Tyrion as a protagonist. Maybe not all good news for the Starks, but still a pretty good person, whereas a lot of people would say that Melisandre is up to no good. But Ghost thinks different. Or is it her magic that's swaying him? That would be odd, because they also seem to be pretty like the dragons. I'm not sure they can be swayed by magic in this sense. So maybe Ghost is to be trusted when it comes to Melisandre. The Stark children, several of them, of course, have the wolf dreams, where they see what the wolves see and experience the world as their wolves. And it's clear from these that the Stark direwolves have connections directly to each other, not just to the person that they are bonded to. And they're able to sense what is happening or has happened to its siblings. So with Ghost, for example, this is from his perspective. So he gets little sections where it's basically Ghost talking. Once they had been 6, 5 whimpering blind in the snow beside their dead mother, sucking cool milk from her hard dead nipples, while he crawled off alone. 4 remained, and one the white wolf could no longer sense. This is, of course, when summer is on the other side of the wall. So this break in magical connections that the wall represents will affect the wolves as well, between wolf to wolf. And he knows that 2 of his siblings are dead. And if Summer were to die when he's on the other side of the wall, the other wolves probably wouldn't know. And Ghost, of course, is instrumental in nudging John's actions, and on a couple of occasions. When John deserts the Night's Watch, Ghost disappears from his side near Molestown, and he later returns and betrays John's hiding position so that his friends can bring him back to Castle Black. Why does Ghost do this? I mean, John, why does he betray John to his friends? Well, it is good for John that he does it, but how does Ghost know this? Is he aware of, again, does he have some prophetic ability that makes it possible for him to know what the best decision is in this case? And of course, Ghost is the one who discovers the cache of dragon glass weapons near the Fist of First Men and leads John to it. Is this some sort of shared memory that he has picked up from other magical creatures, or how does he know about this? Or again, is he guided by prophecy, just like Drogon on some occasions seems to be guided by prophecy? They have connections beyond what people are aware of. Obviously, Bran talks about, or is told that he needs to open his third eye to kind of become in tune with his dreams and seeing the past, the present, and the future. Perhaps these magical creatures essentially have their third eye already open and are tied into this web of magic. Summer as well. Jojen and Mira, when Jojen and Mira first see the direwolves, Jojen mentions that Summer in particular is very, very strong, although he doesn't know it yet. What does he mean by that? What is it that he's very strong in? Is it this ability to know things that are beyond what a wolf should normally know? Is the wolf itself basically a magic user, a skin, the human is a skin changer. Is the wolf also a skin changer of sort by being able to be the partner to the human? Thoughts on some occasions as well, when Bran is in his mind and Summer is the one who's leading. He thinks of himself as the Prince of the Green, Prince of the Wolfswood. He was strong and swift and fierce, and all that lived in the good green world went in fear of him. We even have a section where Bran and Summer are essentially arguing within Summer's mind. They've found the dead deserters from the Night's Watch, and Summer wants to eat them. So Bran is thinking to him, the Black Night's Watch, they were Night's Watch. You can see that his thoughts are still a little simpler, sort of. They are kind of influenced by being filtered through the wolf. But then the direwolf did not care. They were meat. He was hungry. So it's a kind of sharing of minds where the human mind gets filtered through the direwolf mind. The thoughts become more animalistic and wolf-like. And of course we know that skin changers can essentially go into the mind of an animal. If their human body is dying, they can take refuge in the body of their animal. But eventually, the human mind will fade. If they do that, if they sever the connection to their own body and go fully into the animal mind, eventually the animal mind will take over. I think we also have that Summer recognizes when he meets Varamir's pack, and Varamir has died, his human body has died, and he's gone into the mind of his lead wolf. And Summer recognizes this, that this wolf had a human mind in it, but it's now been more and more absorbed into the wolf mind. And this can of course happen if you just spend too long in the animal as well. Then you can kind of forget your own body and be taken over by your bonded animal. Whether one should count other the animals of other skin changers as special in some way is hard to say. They probably are affected by long-term contact with a human mind like that. Getting a little outside of the dire wolves here, but of course we have the speculations that Mormont's raven is showing unusual intelligence in some situations. Obviously, ravens are very, very smart, but could it have been that Joel Mormont was in fact a skin changer, and when he died, he sought refuge in his raven's mind? Alternatively, that the raven's natural intelligence was enhanced by the communication with a human partner. All speculation at this point, but it is an interesting thought that perhaps they do gain a bit more awareness through the bond with the humans. Certainly we see the development of the Stark direwolves, kind of the ones that have close contact with, like Summer and Ghost. Their thoughts, I think, do seem to develop a little bit over time, and they learn things about the human world. I think that more or less covers what we sort of wanted to introduce about the dragons and the direwolves, but I figured we should leave some room for some discussion, because you always have some very good insights, I think, Saffia, and if anyone else is curious about anything, I think the only thing we'll try and avoid is spoilers for future seasons of House of the Dragon. Any other shows that they may come up with, well, we don't know what they're going to be at this point, even if we know they're talking about a lot of them. So, but we can only avoid spoiling what we know is going to come up.
I was thinking that we can compare George R.R. Martin's dragons. I think the Naomi Novik ones are particularly congruent, you know, that they share some features in common, but it's a very far stretch from something like Anne McCaffrey's dragons, where they have very human ways of thinking, and they also have this very kind of tight bond with their partners, so that if the dragon dies, the person may live on but it's a broken shell, and if vice versa, the human dies, the dragons frequently go between and are lost for good.
It's true, and of course it's interesting that you bring up the Pernese dragons, in that, I mean, they have a created origin as well, a scientific created origin, where they, with fire lizards, I believe the little ones were called, right? That they genetically engineered to become these massive creatures to fight the Treadfall. And of course there is the well, question pop up there and derailed me a bit. I'll get to that one in a moment. But with the dragons there, Valyrian dragons, of course, are also perhaps created, and possibly from somewhat smaller creatures as well. And there, it's, I mean, the Pyrenees dragons have a sort of outright said that they have a telepathic ability. And I believe they don't actually fly, do they? They teleport in little increments.
I think they can fly like they fly when they're fighting Threadfall, but they also can go between.
Yes, but I thought there was some discussion that basically, because when somebody asked about the sort of aerodynamics of dragons,
Right.
That her explanation was that they don't actually fly. They do tiny teleport jumps all the time.
Right.
Obviously, looking at the dragons of A Song of Ice and Fire, they have a hard time flying as well. They would need wings that were enormously much larger than what they actually have, and tiny little serpentine bodies. To have heads that, in Balerian's case, were large enough to swallow a mammoth whole, the wingspan would
It would be half the Seven Kingdoms, yes.
To Melina's remark, I just wanted to comment. Yes, I mean, the TV show definitely dropped a lot of direwolf stuff because they just found it incredibly difficult to fit them in. I mean, I understand if it ghosts or to just disappear when he should have been around. And so that is a part of the show. Now, John's reactions and his knowledge of sort of how Ghost responds. I mean, there's one really good example in the Storm of Swords where after Ghost has been gone, he's lost contact with him. And the speculation seems to be that he lost contact with him. He couldn't sense him at all because Ghost was on the other side of the wall. And the wall, just as with Silverwing, seems to be a barrier to magic. But suddenly he's thinking, and suddenly he's feeling really hungry, and he really wants red, bloody meat. And all of a sudden he realizes that's because Ghost has found its way onto the other side, to his side of the wall, and he suddenly is connected to him again. So that makes it very clear that there's a mingling of senses that he knows when his wolf is hungry, he knows when his wolf wants meat, he knows when... and there's one other thing about direwolves I was going to remark on, because when we're talking about obviously comparing to other writers and a lot of people have obviously noticed that there is the skin-changing aspect of things. George may have been inspired a bit by his contemporary, his acquaintance, I think they're friends actually, Robin Hobb. Her Farseer series has a very similar relationship between people who what was the term again? And who have the wit, as they call it in there, who can and they tend to bond with an animal, and there's a kind of mingling of the animal's personality with the person's personality. And I think George thought that was a great idea. I think they came out very close together, but and George has written actually other things he's written a werewolf story and the like, so it's not entirely new for him. But this is very interesting with direwolves because that aspect of thing is actually, the skin changing adds this whole other dimension where we see the wolves through the perspective of the person inside their head, and there's a blending again of their senses, of their thoughts, and of course there's this whole thing about the idea that a skin changer who dies while they're in their animal will end up staying there, some aspect of them will live on in the animal, and that'll give them like a second life, so to speak, which features in a couple of aspects, and may feature quite prominently in the future of the series.
It's interesting that we can tie it in with a lot of novels, but there's one which has close bonds between humans and what appear to be animals but probably aren't really. And that's the Philip Pullman series. And that kind of doesn't, that has this very close bond between the humans and their demons, but doesn't kind of fit into a lot of other fantasy that's around.
No, he obviously does it very interestingly in that the demons do have all the. I mean, they have some of the aspects of the animal that they are. They have some of the instincts of the animal that they choose to look like. But they're clearly also very, very human, since they are sort of a part of the humans, or they are the human soul, essentially. They sort of, they have the soul manifested as a separate animal. So, but certainly the animal companion element in fantasy is a common one, and like you mentioned with Naomi Novik, the bonds between the dragons and the dragon riders there is also a key element of that story. And there is, speaking of Pern, there's a collaboration between Sarah Monette and Elizabeth Bear, companion to wolves, which kind of was inspired by Pern. I know that they had some opinions about the mating rituals of Pernese dragons and how they involved the humans, and how that was sort of how people reacted to that, and they wanted to comment on that. So they have it's kind of set in a Viking society where they also have these very large wolves. They call them trell wolves. They hunt trolls, which are a menace, and the warriors bond to these trell wolves, and the setup is similar to the Pernese dragons, in that there is a queen wolf who large instances where actually multiple wolves mate with the same queen wolf. Of course, this is all male characters. There are no women bonding the trell wolves,
Right.
which gives an entirely different commentary on the sexual nature of the wolf matings compared to the Pernese dragon matings. But that idea of them certainly having it's interesting. I mean, you could definitely see this happening to some extent with direwolves and skin changers in Westeros as well, in that, yes, Jon gets hungry when he senses Ghost being hungry. So if a bitch in heat runs by Ghost, Jon might start feeling very embarrassed, for example. Fortunately, there are not that many direwolves around, but lacking direwolf companions, Ghost might settle for something a smaller wolf. So I mean, they do, these primal instincts kind of carry over. More complicated thoughts and feelings don't, perhaps, but primal instincts are what carry over, and that's probably true for the dragons as well. The rider getting angry might very well make the dragon angry.
So, in a way, what we're looking at is teleempathy rather than telepathy.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. I don't think they can think to each other, basically, do this, do that, but they can feel, and then there seems to be this additional connection to where somehow both the direwolves and the dragons are in tune with what needs to happen.
Yeah.
So trust your direwolf and Trust your dragon.
Yes. But don't let them feed on your friends.
No, I mean, if you trust the direwolves entirely, then Tyrion would be lunch, and I suppose that would,
That would
that would be sad.
Yeah. There was once a magazine that ran a competition as to you had to rewrite the first sentence of a novel in a way that stopped the novel from happening. And the one that I loved most was, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a man in possession of a good fortune must be gay." And then Pride and Prejudice cannot happen.
Yeah, no, that would be some very disappointed ladies, I suppose.
But then, you see, if it was the dragon ate Tyrion or the direwolf ate Tyrion in the first chapter, the rest of, the problem of waiting for the winds of winter and a hope of spring would be gone.
Yeah, no, Tyrion arrives at Winterfell. The three direwolves, whatever it was that was growling at him, immediately decide to divide up one dwarf for a little snack. And, oops.
Yeah.
Mind you, we would have had an entirely different novel there, because then there would have been some very upset Lannisters immediately, and some other political problems.
Jamie would have been upset, but I don't think Cersei would have cared one way or the other.
He's still a Lannister. I don't think she'd appreciate a wolf snacking on him.
Yeah.
That she would probably make an exception for that. That would be the one time. Like she is allowed to. She's possibly allowed to kill him, but wolves aren't allowed to eat him. I suspect.
So. Anyway, any more questions? Because we are coming towards the top of the hour, and I know that some people will be going off on a LitFest tour at the top of the hour. So now is your last chance.
Last chance. Last call. Oh, there the light went out.
Yeah.
I was a bit glowy bright there for a while. Now I can actually see myself. It has, again been lots of fun to come here and chat with you, Saffia. I'm very fond of animals in fantasy, and I'm definitely one of those that worry very much about the fate of the dragons and the direwolves. And I love it that there were people in the first season of the show, Game of Thrones, that when Bran fell out the window, there were people going, "Oh no, did he fall on the puppy?" Like, screw the kid, but did he fall on the puppy?
Puppy? Yeah.
Which was a valid concern, really.
Yeah.
But I do not want any more dead dragons or direwolves, but I will probably have to accept that. And I thought I would throw in a quick recommendation that if anyone has not read, well, there probably very few who have read, Meredith Ann Pierce's Firebringer series. If you like unicorns, and if you like a whole book featuring unicorns as the main characters. It's actually very, very good. She's a very good writer. It's probably very difficult to find these days. But it's probably one of my favorites as far as, like, animals as protagonists. Otherwise, I tend to think that it can get a little... I like the interplay between animals and humans, so the animal bond stories, those are cool. You obviously got Mercedes Lackey, all of the Valdemar books, even if the animals there are very much special magical things with the souls of humans in them.
One thing that I've been fascinated by is the phenomenon of the sort of werewolf stories written by teenage girls. At least
Yes.
I guess most of the writers are teenage girls. It's someone, a wonderful expression from a John Walters Williams book, that someone who has thought much about sex but hasn't had a lot of experience of it.
I think definitely there are perhaps a lot of teenage hormones involved in the writing of these stories, and obviously it tends to focus a lot on the sort of the primal instincts and the idea of wolf packs with alpha males, and so it becomes very much about the sort of simple
Hierarchy.
primal part of which I think is very natural when you're a teenager, and further on as well. Really, it kind of gives there's a freedom to it, I think, in exploring sexuality that way. Not having to have the human morals to worry about.
It is very interesting. And also, I mean, the level of brutality in many of them is quite alarming.
Yes, I think it's, again, as exploring that the wild side of things, perhaps. Much of it probably was inspired by, came out of the Anita Blake series as well, I think. There's certainly all sorts of weird creatures. And then, of course, we had the fascinating trend on Amazon, the self-publishing on Amazon a few years ago. Now we're getting way off track with dinosaur erotica.
I have not come across dinosaur erotica.
I read an article about it. I haven't actually read any dinosaur erotica myself, but it kind of, also some girls who I think started it but for a laugh, and apparently it became quite popular. So, Ravaged by the Raptor, I remember, was one of the titles cited. I cannot recommend or recommend against it. You will have to try it for yourself if you're curious.
Yeah.
That is an entirely different panel.
Yeah. I think that is probably the note we should end on.
We should not get any further into anything like that. The dragons and direwolves of A Song of Ice and Fire, they are perfectly safe from. They are not going around ravaging anyone, I promise.
Right. Okay, well, Freyja and Ran, thank you once again for coming. This has been a brilliant presentation and a wonderful talk, and a chance to share some interesting
book recommendations. Yes. Thank you for inviting us, Saffia. We'll have to see what we can come up with for next year if you still want to have us here. Maybe there'll be something new to talk about.
I want everyone.
Maybe dinosaur erotica.
Yes. I want everyone here to promise that they will not tell Wonders Nowhere about the dinosaur porn.
I suspect that